And our speaker today, his name is Jeffery Olsen, who's here to share his profound near-death experience with us. He has so much to say, how much to offer about the amazing events that took his life in a different turn. We're so happy to be here, and I'm just delighted to have Jeffery Olsen speaking to us.
Thank you, Marian. What a beautiful morning to be with you all. And it is chilly here in Utah, but it's unseasonably warm.
Really?
We've had temperatures that are in the high 50s, 57, 58. And usually by this time of year, we've got snow on the ground and are skiing. So we're experiencing some weather patterns that are much different than traditionally here in the Rocky Mountains of Utah. But it's a pleasure to be with you all, and it's an honor. And we've been planning some time now, Marian and I and Alan, and thank you this morning for your technical expertise to get us all connected. And we're going to spend some time. I'm going to share my near-death experience and some events leading up to that, and then also the aftermath. I think sometimes we focus on the near-death experience, and the life experience seems to be the more profound and important often. What we learn from a near-death experience and how we apply that in our everyday way of being. And I also want to outline too that the near-death experience, the accident that I'm going to share with you this morning, took place over 20 years ago. It was 24 years ago. And I couldn't even speak of this for almost a decade. It was too painful. It was too personal. And, around the near-death experience, certainly I didn't want people to think I was crazy. And I also didn't want people to think that I thought I was special in any way. And, so it took some time. I mean, I really literally processed this for probably 7+ years and only shared it with very close personal friends and family members. And we're going to spend some time this morning talking about a little bit of that. I never had any intention of sharing this publicly. I never had any intention of writing a book. And my book is on Amazon. You can certainly find it there. I'll put it up here on the screen. Knowing. It's a very personal memoir. I mean, I really pour my soul out here on the pages and share all. And there's far more in the book than we have time to discuss or talk about this morning. And I was actually approached by a publisher to write the book. I had no intention of doing it, and I told the publisher no. And yet it was that whisper, if you will, I call it spirit, that let me know in a profound way that if I would share my experience, that others would heal. And healing is what I am all about. It's the whole purpose of me connecting and sharing with this group and all the other groups. If I can bring something positive out of what many would see as a very negative tragedy, then that's my purpose. And that's the reason for doing all this. So with that, let's let's go on a journey. Go back with me, if you will, 24 years ago to the accident and the near-death experience and all that took place. And I still get emotional sometimes when I talk about it. If I do, forgive me. I've got my tissues here if necessary. And like I say, it took a long time before I could even talk about it. My near-death experience was the result of an automobile accident. And it was actually a family vacation, a family road trip. We had taken the entire family to southern Utah. I live in northern Utah, but we'd gone down on Easter weekend to see the big, magnificent red rock, features in southern Utah, but more specifically to visit my wife's family who lived in southern Utah. And we went to see her parents and her grandparents. And one of the main objectives is her grandfather had gotten Alzheimer's, and he was deteriorating fast. And we got that call from her parents saying, hey, you may want to come see Grandpa. He's not doing well. And that was really the main objective for the trip. But we loaded the family in the car, packed our bags, and it was about a 5-hour drive. It wasn't a long, drive, but it was about 5 hours from where we lived to connect with them. We had a beautiful Easter weekend, beautiful dinner with the family, visiting everyone, even Grandpa, who we were told may not even remember who we are because of the deteriorating condition he was in. He remembered us well, and he played with the great-grandchildren, and we had a wonderful day with him. He was in a convalescence center. We had dinner with the family. We celebrated Easter morning on Sunday. And I'll never forget, some of the events of that. Our two sons, Spencer, my oldest, was 7 years old, and our youngest, Griffin, was just a toddler. He was 14 months old. And he was just learning to walk and say his first little words. And, we had a family tradition of hard boiling eggs, and then we would color them or dye them bright colors and hide them in the garden and the yard, and the kids would go out and find the Easter eggs. And Griffin, as he looked for these Easter eggs, would go and find them, and he was just toddling. I mean, he would walk a few steps and fall down and crawl and then pull himself up on something, and he would bring me one of these bright colored eggs, and he could only say single words, but he would hold it up and he would say, "Dad, ball." He thought the colored Easter eggs were balls. And that's engraven in me. It's interesting. I mean, grief. And I don't know how many of you have lost loved ones. We're all going to have people we care about pass. But it's an interesting journey. I have a dear friend, and he told me that grief is like carrying a stone in your pocket. It never goes away, but you get used to the weight. And some of these fond memories I've had are some of the things that have carried me through. But we had a beautiful celebration, and then Monday morning came and it was time to return to work. And of course, we had the long drive ahead of us. We had breakfast. We said goodbye to everyone. I packed the car up. We buckled the kids in their car seats, and we were just in the car getting ready to pull away from the curve. And these are things in hindsight that I will never forget either, as we're just pulling away. I mean, I'm ready to put the car in drive. And my wife, Tamara, said, "Wait, stop." I thought she had forgotten something. So I stopped the car. And she looked at me and she said, "I just want to say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." And, there was Grandma and Grandpa on the porch waving goodbye the way they do. And in that moment, I thought, oh, women, come on, we've got the car packed, we've got to get moving. But I stopped the car and I watched as she jumped out and she ran up to her mother and father. And I noticed that she not only embraced them both, but she kissed them. She hugged and kissed her mom and dad, and then she joyfully came running back to the car and hopped in, and away we went. Now, I share this for a specific reason. I speak of this whisper, this spirit, this inclination, intuition, if you will. Boy, follow that. Follow that, because here we were pulling away, and she's like, "Wait, stop. I want to go say goodbye one more time." And given the events of the day, that was the last goodbye. Because as she jumped in the car and I took the car out on the interstate and I cranked it up to 75 miles an hour and set the cruise control, which is as fast as I could legally go, I was hurrying. I was in a rush to get back home, to get back to work, to get back to all the things I thought were so important. And I had a moment even on that drive that I found interesting, that is engraven into my heart. It's not my consciousness, it's engraven in my heart. I looked in the rearview mirror as I was driving just to check traffic, and there wasn't much traffic that day. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, and these are moments. I mean, this is like a moment, right? I mean, eternity can be in a moment sometimes. And as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I noticed my son Griffin, my little toddler, the one that had been hunting the Easter eggs. And he was sound asleep in his car seat. And I had this profound knowing. And it was a connection. It's like, wow, look at him. Now, we had been told we may not ever have more children after Spencer. There had been complications, and yet there he was, our miracle boy. And I thought, what a blessing. And I noticed details. I noticed how long his eyelashes were. And I thought, what a beautiful child. It was a glance in the rearview mirror, but about that same time as I saw him and noticed the details of his beautiful sleeping face, I heard Spencer, my 7-year-old, and he was playing with action figures that he'd gotten in his Easter basket and making all the joyful noise of a little boy. And I glanced over at my wife, Tamara, who had reclined her seat, and she was also fast asleep, but she was still holding onto my hand. And I thought, wow, wow. I mean, we're 10 years into a marriage, raising these children, and we both had our careers. Tamara was a high school teacher. I was running an ad agency. But I thought, what a lucky man I am. We're 10 years into the marriage. She's still holding my hand like she did on our first date when I had a couple extra dollars and took her to a $1 movie in college. And it was this profound moment of gratitude in a glance, just in the glance of a rearview mirror. And I felt so lucky, so blessed, if you will. And then, my attention went back to the road, and we carried on. We started heading up continuing up the interstate. And it was about an hour after that it all came apart. There was reports of heavy crosswinds. There was reports of a red truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. I don't remember any of that. And perhaps the hardest part of the story to tell is, to the best of my recollection, I may have dozed off just for a moment, just when you nod off, just when I'm not even sure I fell asleep, but I may have just nodded off. And in doing so, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car, and the car began to roll. Not off the road, but down the road on the hard concrete at 75 miles per hour. It was a horrific accident. The police reports say the car rolled probably no less than 6 or 8 times. I blacked out for most of that. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. In fact, the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old son crying in the back seat. And I thought, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. It was that cry a father knows that, well, he's hurt, but he's okay. He's okay. I've got to get to him. But that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid smell of gasoline and all the broken glass. I was struggling to breathe. I was in intense pain, but I had no knowledge of my injuries. I was unaware of my injuries, but what had actually happened is that both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. The left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been damaged and broken. However, it didn't damage the spinal column. It just cracked the vertebrae. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn completely off. There was no muscle through the rotator cuff or anything else holding it on. And then the seat belt had cut through my midsection and ruptured all my insides. My intestines were ruptured everywhere. I was in a horrible physical condition. I had no knowledge of the injuries. All I knew is my son was crying. I needed to get to my son, and I was pinned and couldn't move. And that's when the reality hit in a very drastic way that no one else was crying. And that's when I realized and was very well aware. And like I say, this is what's hard to talk about. I knew that Griffin, my little son, was gone. He was killed instantly in the accident. Tamara had also been killed instantly in the accident. not to be graphic or morbid, but because, she had her seat reclined, the seatbelt had not restrained her properly. And she had sustained head trauma that took her life. And Griffin, my little son, who was in his car seat, buckled in safely, the car seat had broken apart. And he had come out of the car seat and had been ejected from the car. And I mean, the fright of a father, I'm like, where's my little boy? And I knew he is gone, which in some ways was the worst news I could feel within my soul. But also I thought, well, he's not suffering on the side of the street like I am. Anyway, I don't share that to be graphic or morbid or dark, but it was in that darkness, perhaps the darkest moment of my life, that light came. And words are often difficult to describe it, but light came to me. I felt light rush to me and circle around me as if I was being embraced in this blanket of comfort, of light, it was tangible. And I began to rise above the accident scene. And suddenly the pain was gone. I could breathe. And I was actually confused. I'm like, wow, what's happening? How can I possibly be okay? This comforting light, how could I possibly be okay? And that was my question when suddenly Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was in that light with me, right next to me. She was right with me in the light, and she was gorgeous. She was beautiful. There was no head trauma. There was no injury. She was absolutely radiant. But she began to communicate to me saying, Jeff, you can't come. You can't come. You got to go back. You got to go back. You can't come. And we actually had a conversation. We had this conversation about if I went with her, we'd leave our oldest son, Spencer, at the tender age of 7, orphaned. And he needed a parent. And we actually had the conversation, and I chose to come back. And that was an interesting thing, an interesting choice. I learned that all of our life in those moments, moment to moment, is simply a choice. And we have no idea how powerful our thoughts and our choices are. It's as if the entire universe supported my choice to come back. And as I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say, I made the choice to come back, and I found myself moving through a hospital. Now, I didn't have to figure out, how do I come back? That's when I say our thoughts are so powerful. I simply had the intention, I'm going back, and I was wandering around a hospital. Now, I have no concept of time in this light, if you will. I later found out that people had arrived at the scene. Spencer, my 7-year-old, was banged up. He had broken his wrist and his ribs were bruised, but he was okay. I had to be extricated from the car. And with the extent of my injuries, I was life flighted or airlifted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I had no knowledge or recollection of any of that. All I knew is I'd crashed the car. I'd said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And here I was moving about this hospital, seeing the doctors and the patients and the nurses and the families of the patients. I was seeing all the busyness of a level 1 trauma center. And yet when I say seeing it, I was experiencing every individual. I mean, everyone I saw, I knew their love. I knew their hate. I knew their motivations. I knew their joys. I knew their challenges. I knew them as if they were me. I call it a oneness. I was experiencing an absolute connection, a oneness to every soul in that ER center. And it was coupled with love. There was this profound love. It didn't matter who they were or what they had done, or everything from the heroin addict to the saintly grandmother. I was profoundly connected. And there was this love for every individual and this compassion. And it's interesting. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. We read the Bible, and I had a biblical verse come to me during this experience. And it was the famous verse, as inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of one of these, you've done it unto me, which I used to believe was a nice verse about being nice. But I was experiencing something at a whole different level. And I thought, wow, perhaps Jesus knew this, that we are one, that I am the man in prison, I am the beggar on the street, that we are all connected. And I was experiencing this connection in a profound and powerful way until I came up on a body that I didn't feel anything from. I didn't feel any, connection. And I stepped closer to take a look. And as I looked on the gurney, that's when I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. But it wasn't me. I was having this profound connected experience, but there was my body. There was my flesh, and it was an absolute wreck. And I knew I had to get back in. I'd made that promise. I'd made that choice. I got to get back in that body. And again, I didn't have to figure that out. It was just the intention. I'm going back in. And then I was in the body, but back to the pain, the grief, the guilt, the regret, the trauma, the darkness, the panic of the reality of everything that had happened. And I was in a horrible state. I was ventilated. There was a big tube down my throat doing the breathing from my lungs. My legs were obviously immobile as they'd been crushed and shattered. My right arm was immobile because it had been torn off so badly. And they actually eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the medical tubes and equipment. And I simply had to lay there and be still and wallow in the reality of half the family's gone, the guilt of I was driving the car, and the worry about what about my 7-year-old son. And I don't know, there really aren't words to describe that pain. There's an interesting side story to my experience, which in some ways may make it unique. The attending physician at the Level 1 Trauma Center, who's become a dear friend of mine, his name is Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He and one of the nurses also had a profound shared death experience. As they came into the trauma room, and there was a team of 5 surgeons working on me and doing all they could to save my life, both the doctor and the nurse experienced my wife, Tamra, her spirit, in the ER room. And Jeff O'Driscoll shares how he saw her. He saw her standing above my body as they worked on me, and she communicated with him. And when he shared this with me, which is probably a miracle, he didn't know me from Adam. We had never met. We didn't know each other. And the fact that he came after I was out of the ER and came and visited me probably, it was probably a month or more after the accident. He came and saw me in surgical recovery, and I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries in all, putting me back together. But the fact that he came and shared this with me may be one of the biggest miracles of the story. A clinician, a credible doctor who had a profound spiritual experience and was moved upon to share that with the patient who he didn't know, me, a stranger. And he had no idea that I had had a near-death experience or what had happened to me at the time. But as he shared that she communicated with him, I asked him, what did she say? And he said, well, it was odd. He said, the only thing she was communicating is her gratitude for all we are doing to save your life. And I just burst into tears. I said, of course she would. That's exactly who she was. And yet he had no idea the deal we had made. He had no idea the conversation I had had with my wife in that bubble of light, which, was the catalyst for my choice to come back and survive. Anyway, we've become dear friends, and he's written a beautiful book called Not Yet, where he outlines not only the experience he had with me and Tamra in the ER, but other experiences he has had. He's a very spiritual man, and he's a very courageous man to step forward to share his experiences in the ER room in such a way that, may not be widely accepted in the medical community. But anyway, that's an interesting side note. The hospital was difficult. I would go from ICU to surgical recovery, back in ICU. I had horrific infections. I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs, which are often lethal, and that would land me back in ICU. There was all kinds of horrible complications, and as I mentioned, multiple surgeries to get me to where, I was stabilized. And then I spent, a long time just in surgical recovery doing all the additional surgeries that needed to be done to repair my body. And perhaps one of the most profound experiences was at the end of my hospital stay. I was out of ICU. I was out of surgical recovery. I was actually in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital. And I think it's probably relevant to bring up the two most profound experiences were at the scene of the accident, before I'd been put on morphine or any heavy narcotics. And then at the end of my hospital stay, when I was off of, any of the morphine or heavy narcotics, I was taking some Tylenol for pain. But the experience, and during those long months in the hospital, I must add that it's like the door never shut. I'd had this peek into the other side, and it's like the door never really shut. I had profound experiences, and you can read about those in Knowing, but I'm going to cut to the chase of perhaps the most profound experience. And at the end of my hospital stay, I've been there for months. I'm just weeks away from coming home. I'm incredibly worried about my 7-year-old son, who was now able to visit me. I mean, early on, they had to leave all my belly wounds open and everything else. He wasn't even able to see his dad for a while, but now that I was stabilized, he could come into the hospital, he could be with me. But the grief of Griffin, my toddler son, I didn't have a connection with him. I didn't say goodbye to him. I'd only said goodbye to Tamara and come back. And I was in, a pretty, powerful emotional state of grief. I was very sad. And my family was incredible. My brothers, who are my heroes, they practically lost their jobs to come and sit with me in the hospital, to see me through. Only a few days in, when they knew they had to take the leg, I had gotten gangrene in my, both legs were crushed, and they were able to get blood flow in the right leg, but they couldn't in the left leg. And they told the family, of course, I was unconscious and in ICU. They said, we've got to take this leg or he will not survive. And my brothers and I played football together. I've been a Division I athlete. We played at Utah State, which is playing today for the Mountain West Championship as far as the NCAA goes. But it was very difficult for them to have to sign those papers because I was not in a mental state to sign the papers to take the leg. And the doctors basically told them, look, we cut the leg off today or you bury him tomorrow. That's the reality of it. And my brothers, not wanting to have any one individual shoulder that responsibility of signing for the amputation, they locked arms and walked down together and they both signed it. And they said, we're going to save our little brother's life. And they signed the papers, and I have an older brother and a younger brother. I'm stuck in the middle. So the older brother he's always the mentor. He's the strong one. And my younger brother was my best buddy, but they signed the papers and they proceeded to do the amputation. I share this because men, brothers, if we could connect in this world in brotherly love, we could change everything. We could change everything. We'd stop going to war. We'd stop killing each other over whatever it is we decide to go to battle over. And on this particular night at the end of my hospital stay, my little brother was there. He had come to sit with me because he knew I had such a hard time in my grief, even going to sleep. And it's interesting. I had laid on my back so long, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back of my head. And he was teasing me about this, about how I was going bald on the back of my head from laying on my back so long, but they had finally stabilized my abdominal injuries and I was able to lay on my side. And as I rolled on my side to sleep, he said, I'll just sit with you for a while till you fall asleep. And I did fall asleep. In fact, as I slept, I thought, gosh, I'm sleeping. I was in a deep, peaceful sleep. And I was aware of the fact that, wow, I probably haven't slept for months. I've been unconscious, and I've dozed in and out, but I was in a beautiful, peaceful sleep. And as I slept, I felt that light again. That beautiful light that had come at the accident, that comforting light that surrounded me. And once again, I felt so well, so healed and whole, and I began to rise above the hospital bed. But this time, the light dispensed. It dissipated like fog off a lake, and I was standing in the most beautiful, glorious place, and I was whole, and I began to run. I don't run in this realm with the condition of my legs. Well, my one leg that remains still has 6 pins and a plate in it, holding it together. But in this experience, I was running. I was running, joyfully, gleefully running. And I can't stress how physical it was. I mean, I could feel everything. I could feel the intelligence in my feet and in my calves and in my thighs as I ran. I could feel the love and the energy of the ground beneath my feet. It was such a blissful, joyful experience, and all of my senses were multiplied and magnified. The smell, the sight, the sound. I could taste the sky. I mean, it was an incredible, connected experience to everything around me. And, I've heard people refer to things like heaven or the spirit world or the other side. There's only one word that comes close to what I was experiencing. And I was home. I was home. It was so welcoming. I was so much at home. And as I ran in this glorious experience, I had the knowing that I wasn't there to stay. And at that same time, there was this corridor that, off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go this way. And I did. I began to run down the corridor. And I slowed down and made my way down to the corridor. And at the end of the corridor was a crib. And Griffin, my little toddler son, had been sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident. He was only 14 months old. And I raced to this crib at the end of the corridor. And when I looked in it, there was my little boy. There was my beautiful little boy, sleeping as peacefully as when I glanced in the rearview mirror. And I noticed the details. I looked at how long his eyelashes were, and I swept him up in my arms. And I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child. There's a weight and a heat, the experience was so real, so physical. I picked him up, and the weight and the heat, and I felt him solid against me. And I was even marveling of, well, if I'm out of the body, how can this feel so physical? And yet I could feel him breathing. And I felt his breath against my neck. And I even leaned over and I smelled his hair. I don't know if you've ever smelled the hair of a loved one, but I smelled his hair. And I thought, it's him. This is my little boy, and I'm holding him in a very real way. And I began to weep, just like I am now, holding my son and thinking, wow, he's okay. All that worry, all that wonder in those long months of the hospital, he's perfect. And as I held him, I felt this overwhelming presence coming up behind me. Something so powerful and so cosmic and so wise and so big. It was overwhelming. And the presence was coming closer closer and closer as I held my son. And I began to become fearful. In my upbringing, I thought, wow, that's God, and I'm in trouble. The guilt. My little boy's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut short because I dozed off or lost control. And the presence was coming closer and closer as I had these thoughts. And finally, it was so near me. And I had the thought, oh, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And as I had that thought, and this almost felt physical too, it's like these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my son. And that's when the lid just came off. And there was this download. There was this communication. There was this, well, the first thing is I had the thought, I hope I can be forgiven. The information came in, there's nothing to forgive. Your life is absolutely in divine order. And I thought, how can that be? And I had the life review. You know, they say your life flashes before your eyes. I was looking at my life and I was seeing all the things. And I was saying, oh, but that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And the beloved being said, there are no mistakes. What did you learn? That's all that matters, is what did you learn? I saw things and I thought, well, I knew that was wrong, and I did it anyway. And this beautiful divine creator communicated to me, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. You are as profound and beloved and divine and perfect as the child you hold in your arms. And it was an interesting thing to be held by the creator and then to hold, in some ways, my creation, this little boy, and realize that love was magnified. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew in that moment that it rippled out to every living soul. There was so much unconditional love. It was overwhelming, unconditional love. And I also had a little tutorial on choice. This magnificent being, God, creator, whatever word you want to put on it, said I could be mad the rest of my life because half the family was taken away, and I could blame God and I could be angry, or I could blame myself. I could feel guilty and beat myself up for the rest of my life. Or I was given the choice, or you can exercise your will. And I thought, my will? What do you mean, my will? And I even asked the question, I thought it was your will be done. That was my upbringing. And this beloved being said, your will is my will. That's how much you are loved. And it was proposed that I could give my son. I could hand my son over. I could let go and trust and give him, and it would never feel as if he had been taken away, that I could exercise my will and hand him over and give him back. And my wife too, if I chose, and in all that love and beauty. And I don't even know if love is a word that can define it. I mean, it's the meaning behind that word, I suppose, but in all that unconditional love, I was able to kiss my little boy, and I handed him over. I gave him to God. And then I came to myself. I woke up. I came to in the hospital bed to the amputation and the braces. I had my left leg was cut off above the knee. My right leg was in a brace. My right arm was in a sling. I was like a mummy, but I had a little different perspective about love and about choice. And yet I still grieved like anybody grieved. I don't want anyone to think that I had this horrible accident. I had a near-death or out-of-body experience and I was okay. No, we had a horrible accident. I had profound experiences, and I grieved as miserably as anybody grieves in the loss of a loved one. And yet I knew they weren't lost. I knew they were simply alive and well in another place, but they weren't with me. Those arms that held me weren't here. And so the grief was very real. One of the most difficult things was coming home. I had worried so much about my 7-year-old, and he had stayed with my little brother. They took him in just like one of their own. And, he had seen me in the hospital, and yet I was going to come home. And I'll never forget the day I returned home, and I didn't get to go to my house. I had to go to my brother's house, and they had cleaned out one of the rooms and put a hospital bed in there. They'd built a ramp for the wheelchair for me to get in and out. My family was incredible as far as the support and what they did for me. And they came and got me at the hospital. And of course, in my condition, they had to literally pick me up. They'd have to pick me up and put me into this electric wheelchair that I could drive with my one working left hand. I'd drive this little electric wheelchair. And that's the condition I went home in. Colostomy bag because of the ruptured intestines. I mean, I was still in quite a state. But as we drove up to the house, I'll never forget watching, because there was Spencer, my 7-year-old, looking out the window, watching as his uncles, his big, strong uncles, would pick up me, his dad, and put me in that electric wheelchair. And he was looking out the window. And I thought, how's he ever going to deal with this? How's he ever going to accept this? He lost everything I lost. He lost his brother. He lost his mom. And in many ways, he's lost his dad. I'm almost an invalid, And yet, as I got in the wheelchair, or the brothers, sat me in the wheelchair, and I began to navigate, he came running out of the house. This little boy, and he ran toward me, but then he ran right past me. He went right by me. And I thought, oh, I know this is too much. I know this is just too hard for him to accept. And, all that fear about my condition and everything came very powerfully into my consciousness. And I began to navigate my way up to the ramp. And my brothers were emphatic. I had to do it myself. They wanted me independent. And as I turned the wheelchair to go up the ramp, I just looked to see where Spencer, my oldest son, had gone. And what had happened is he had run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. He was knocking on all those neighbors' doors, and he was saying, come out, come out. My dad has made it home. Come see my dad. And I burst into tears again. And I thought, all my self-judgments are not his. And he did run and throw himself on my lap as he had made the rounds to the neighbors. And it just about killed me, because I still had all the sutures, in from the abdominal repair. And he threw his arms around my neck. And I said, son, I'm going to work very hard to get well, but I'm going to be like this for a while. It's going to take some time. And I explained, that it was a process. And I asked him, I said, are you going to be okay with this? And, he was only 7. He's now 30 years old. He's all grown up. He's married. He's a beautiful man. But he threw his arms around me. And when I said, are you going to be okay with this? He said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And we laugh about that to this day. But in that moment, I burst into tears again. I cry a lot since my near-death experience. And I had a profound realization. I mean, there I was in a wheelchair, holding my surviving son. And I realized that was no less divine than being in the other realms, holding my son that had passed. Suddenly, heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. There was simply to be in that perfect moment and relish that unconditional love of a child, which was as powerful as the unconditional love as a creator, as he held me and we cried together. And he was so thrilled that I was home, that I was alive, that I had survived. And gosh, we had miracles. I mean, I'm going to wrap up so we can get to questions. My family was a miracle. The guys at work, my friends were miracles. We had angels. I have 2 of the most fantastic guardian angels from the other realm you can even imagine. I'm very watched over, and we all are. Those that pass, that we love, they never are disconnected from us. They are always involved in our lives, and they look out for us and they watch out for us. One of the most magnificent angels is my current wife. I mean, I did heal. I did get better. I got back to work. They fit me with a prosthetic limb. I learned to walk again. So many things, and you can read about this in Knowing. It goes through the whole gamut. But to Tanya, my current wife, came into our lives in a profound way. I wasn't dating, I wasn't looking, I was just focused on raising my son. I'd hired a nanny that would come in and help with homework and do a meal while I was at work, making the money to pay for our lives. And Tanya came into our lives. And she's an incredible soul. She's the hero of this story. In fact, it was interesting. When I realized I was beginning to have feelings for her, we just started as friends. In fact, she was living in Arizona. We were pen pals, if you will. We'd write emails and talk on the phone. And when I realized I was having feelings for her, I had a bunch of guilt around that too. I remember I ended up at Tamara, my first wife's grave, and I'm sobbing on the lawn and I'm angry with her. I wanted to pick a fight. I'm like, how dare you? You left me. I'm here alone and I'm trying to raise our son and I don't even walk right. And I was using a cane at the time. And it's funny, as I poured out my soul and kind of let her have it, I was angry. I was in the mood for a fight. She came to me, and I don't see her with my physical eyes, but I felt her present as I was hunched over, crying and hollering over her grave. I felt her hands on my back. And she said a profound thing to me. She said, I loved you enough to leave. And I thought, what? And it was interesting because she said, we had a deal. I would have loved nothing more than to stay and grow old with you, but we had a deal. Your soul came to get something in this experience, and I supported that. I loved you enough to leave so that your soul would expand in these ways. So don't berate me for loving you that much. Now, I was still in a fighting mood, and I said, yeah, but I'm having feelings for another woman. And she actually laughed. And she said, of course you are. I know who you are. I know how you are. In fact, she said, I sent her your way. And she said, you can choose anybody you want, but I know her heart, and I've sent her your way. And I'm trying to look out for you. Our son needs a mom. You're a pretty good dad, but you're a lousy mother, and anyway, it was a profound experience. And because of that, I pursued the friendship and the relationship and the courtship and the eventual marriage with Tanya. And just to outline her character, and then I'll wrap up. I mean, as we got engaged, and, she was going to move back to Utah from Arizona, and I started to take down pictures of Tamara in the house. I started to take things down, and I thought, out of respect for her, I should give a fresh start here. And she came to the house and she saw that I'd taken pictures down, and she said, don't dare take all the pictures down. She said, that little boy, Spencer, deserves a picture of his mom in this house. And she said, so do you. This is her character. She said, I'm not threatened from a woman that's passed. And I said, well, I know, but I've told you how I mean, in our early conversations, I'd say, I'm never going to love again. I'm broken. There's no way I could ever move on. And I said, how are you going to deal with that? And she said, Jeff, knowing that you can love at that level is half of the attraction. And she said, trust me, I don't have to marry a one-legged man with a son. I've got other options, but I love you guys. And she came into our lives, and she, she's the one that put the pieces together. We adopted two boys. I don't even call them my adopted sons. They're just my sons. Anyway, it's all in knowing. There's a whole, knowing goes right up into Spencer's marriage, that little 7-year-old as he grew up, and his journey, which was not easy through adolescence and early adulthood, and to his eventual finding love for himself. I'm incredibly grateful. I know it's maybe rooted in tragedy, but that's just our judgment of it. Tragedy. I perhaps am the luckiest man in the world to have found love twice, to have the things I have, to experience the things I've experienced. And I'm going to wrap up. I would love to get into questions. For me, the Q&A is the interesting part. The dialogue is always far more interesting than the monologue. And so let's just do that. And Alan, I'll turn on the chat box here. But gosh, ask me anything. I'm an open book, and you can ask me anything and I'll give you a response. I don't have your answers. I don't see myself as an expert or a guru. I'll share my response and we'll go from there.
Well, I'll start. Jeffrey, it was just a pleasure to listen to your story. I've read it. I've seen the articles. And this is the first time that I've really heard it in person. And I'm thrilled to be in your presence. I really am. Because you're so honest and you're so open about the whole thing.
Well, it's an honor. It's an honor, and there's nothing to be but honest and open. I mean, when I wrote the book, this was an interesting experience. It wasn't like, I went back to the scene of the accident. When the publisher approached me, I thought, there's no way I'm writing a book about this. And I went back to the scene of the accident. And Tanya, my current wife, took me. She said, look, you just go spend some time. And I did, and I prayed. I still pray. I'm a guy who prays, and I asked my creator, I'm like, look, I've got this contract from a publisher. I don't want to write a book. I don't want to do this, but give me some direction. And it's funny, the answer wasn't write a book. But the answer came in a way, it's like, look, this is one of the reasons you're here. I mean, you lived through this. And specifically what I was told, and I can quote it, when that voice that speaks to the heart comes through, I can quote, I was told, share your experience and others will heal. And so suddenly, writing a book seemed the most appropriate way to share the experience. And others have healed. I mean, that's the whole reason I do this. It's incredible. I wrote the book and I was so self-conscious about it. I didn't fancy myself a writer. And I figured, well, my mom will buy a copy. That my mom and my brothers will buy a copy. But I mean, the thing hit number 3 in the category on Amazon in the first 10 days. And suddenly there was requests from literally all over the world. I mean, I've been to Amsterdam and London and Oslo, Norway. And I mean, with Zoom and the pandemic, I was speaking in Israel and Ireland all in the same week based on virtual gatherings. And I get the most incredible emails and letters and notes from people that have healed. And that's the whole point. One of the most incredible ones I got it. It came in a letter. It was a snail mail letter, and it was actually from the publishing house. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what's in here. And I opened it up. And there was a little 3x5 card inside of the envelope. And I looked at it and it had little teeny hand scratch writing in pencil, on this 3x5 card. And I turned it over, and I realized it was jail mail. It was from an inmate. Someone that was in jail up in Vancouver, actually in prison. And I turned it back over and read. And he only had the publisher's address. That he had sent this 3x5 card to the publisher's address, which is on the back of the book. And he explained that he had lost his family too, but not to death, that he had done this horrible thing in his life, that everyone had abandoned him for it, that he was in prison doing his time, paying his debt. But he said, I read your book and it changed me. He said, I've realized that God loves me and that I can be a much different person coming out of here than I was when I went in. And I started weeping again, and I thought, well, that's the guy. That's the one I wrote the book for. And yet I've had, multiple cards and letters like that. And I think, okay, well, the divine order is in charge, not me. And it isn't about writing a book, but it's about people healing and finding their own divinity, finding their own answers and moving forward in their lives and in a courageous and confident way. knowing that we're all manifestations of the divine creator, no matter what creed, color, race, religion, none of that matters. We are all loved, and we're all manifestations of that. And the perfection is in the diversity. That's the beauty of it. But that's a beautiful comment, Mary, and thank you for saying that. I see a question now. Yes, I agree. This is beautiful. This is from Corrine. She says, thanks for sharing. You made me cry and laugh, and I'm crying too. So we're in this together. So happy to hear once again that we have contracts with others and how we are all one with each other and God, spirit, universe. Thanks. Wonderful way to start the day. Yes, Corrine, you should write the book. We are one. We are all divine manifestations in our beautiful uniqueness. That's, I like to say that in this big white universe, this universe, that's a big word, universe. Uni, like a unicycle means one. And verse means song, one song. And we each have our chorus to sing. We each have our part, we each have our tone and our vibration. And together, that's what makes perfection. And it's not complete without each and every one of us, and that's where we're going. So Corrine, thank you for that beautiful comment.
It is hard to talk because we're, I think, all in this very profound mood right now. But I've been to other talks with someone who's had a near-death experience named Daniel Brinkley. And I'm wondering if and he also expressed what you did when he first was in the hospital and was having the near-death experience. He thought he was crazy and he didn't tell anybody for quite a long time, because until a near-death experience researcher, I guess, reached out to him and he found out this is a very common experience. I'm just wondering if you've had support from other people that have been through near-death experiences like that, and if that's been helpful.
That's a beautiful question, Emily. And I always have a story, but I do have a profound story about that. I hadn't written the book yet. I had looked into a few near-death experiences and thought, well, maybe I'm not crazy. But this was an interesting thing. Dr. Raymond Moody, who's like the father of the near-death experience, was coming to Salt Lake City to speak. And I'd inquired about that. I'm like, I'd like to hear Dr. Moody speak. And I got a ticket and all was set. And I had a friend of a friend that, had arranged he was involved in the arrangement of it. Anyway, the very day that Dr. Raymond Moody showed up, I got a call from this friend. And he said, Jeff, we've had some things fall through. We need someone to go get Dr. Raymond Moody at the airport. Is there any way you could drive out there and pick? I said, you know what? I'll clear my schedule. I'll go get him this afternoon and I'll bring him to the event. So I got to drive out to the airport. I had the sign, Dr. Raymond Moody, and he came out and got in the car, and it was some time before the event was in the evening and it was early afternoon. And I said, we were having small talk, and I said, you're probably hungry. Would you like something to eat? We can stop at a restaurant and I'll buy your lunch. And he said, sure, that would be great. So we sat together, and he asked me, have you ever had anything happen? And I sat over our lunch, crying and dripping just like I am now, telling him about the experience. And he said the same thing. He said, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, yes, you are. And he said, when you do, I will write the foreword to your book. And sure enough, when I contacted him, and it was probably, it was a year later, I said, Raymond, I said, I'm writing a book. A publisher's reached out. Are you still up for writing the foreword? And he said, absolutely. And he had me the foreword written in a few days. It was amazing. I've had incredible support as I've shared the story. And the interesting thing, the first time I shared it was at IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. They have a chapter here in Salt Lake City. And and I'll give you the long explanation to this too, but I was teaching a Sunday school class on a Sunday morning, and I had not talked about the near-death experience, but the topic was the love of God. And I couldn't even get through the lesson. I'm crying, saying, and I'm far less worried about religion. It's more about spirituality, but I was teaching this Sunday school class, and one of our neighbors, a woman in the back, came up. She said, something happened to you, didn't it? And I said, well, it did, but I don't talk about that. And she said, well, you've got, I want it. She came over to the house that night and said, you got to tell me what happened. And I shared with her, and then she reached out to Ions and this fellow at Ions, and she said, you've got to talk to him. And I talked to him, and he said, you've got to come talk to our group. And I said, no, I don't talk about this publicly. I don't share this. And he actually said to me, Jeff, there's people in our group that are grieving. They've had loved ones pass. There's people in our group that are in late stage cancer. They're about to die. They want comfort. He says, we even have a group of goth teenagers that come in that are, infatuated with death. Come speak to the group. And I finally acquiesced to his request. And that's where the publisher connected. In the audience was a publisher that came up and said, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. And then that's what constituted the prayer and the trip down to the scene of the accident, which was at mile marker 80 on I-15 outside of a little town called Parowan. But I had a lot of support, Emily, to answer the question. I was very, very lucky from the onset. I mean, here was a doctor, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, that listened to what happened to me. And he didn't put me in the psych ward or ship me off as crazy at all. He listened and said, well, this all makes sense now, So I was lucky. I know others have not been as well supported in sharing their experience, but I was very lucky in having, powerful people within the near-death society. I've now become dear friends with Eben Alexander and Mary Neal and, many of the others, Anita Morjani. And if I'm crazy, we're all crazy. So I'm in good company.
Thank you.
I'm still dripping, guys. Forgive me. I've got tissues here. I often get emotional when we get into these topics.
I was wondering, do you still astral travel and talk with your first wife and baby?
Dawn, that's a beautiful question. And the answer is yes. In fact, Tanya, my current wife, has had experiences with my first wife, Tamra. She has come to her in dreams and visions. I've had a couple beautiful experiences with Griffin, my son, and I'll share one of those. And there's others in the book. Knowing, I share all of this in knowing. And this was not that long ago. And the funny thing is, I wasn't sleeping. It's not like I was asleep. I refer to this as a dream, but perhaps I should call it a vision because it was one of those lucid dreams. But what happened is I found myself remembering or sitting. I was in the front seat of my father's old International pickup truck. I grew up on a farm. And I'm sitting in this truck, and I mean the smell of the truck, and I can remember the truck, and I look down and I'm in a red corduroy jumpsuit. And I'm like, what's that about? And then I noticed it had snaps on the insides of the thighs, like what a toddler wears. And I looked at my feet and I had little white toddler shoes on. And I'm like, wow, I remember this. I remember this. I can remember, I hated that red pantsuit. And I remember the toddler shoes and the smell of the truck. And then the truck began to sway because it was out in the pasture and the cows had come up and there was feed in the back of the truck and the cows were all, getting at the feed. And I remember being frightened. And I'm like, gosh, I remember this like yesterday. I remember being in this experience. And then I saw my father come and he shooed the cows away and he picked me up to comfort me. And I thought, wow, I remember this. I couldn't have been any older than 14 months old. And that was the age that Griffin passed. And when I had that thought, that consciousness, all of a sudden the truck went away, the red pantsuit went away, my dad, everything disappeared. And there I was standing in that beautiful pasture, which was the old family farm. And I looked over and there was this incredible young man, this magnificent man. And I knew in a moment that was Griffin. I recognized him, even though I held him as a toddler in the near-death experience. There he was, and he was this beautiful, magnificent man. And I wanted to rush to him. I wanted to get to him, and yet I couldn't. He just stood there, like 6 or 8 yards away. And yet he looked in my eyes, and suddenly there was this nonverbal communication. And what he communicated to me was, I wanted you to remember this, because I'll never forget being your little boy. And I'll never forget having you as my dad. And I mean, boy, at that point, wild horses couldn't have held me away. I rushed to him. And he was taller than me. And I mean, just a strong young kid. And we embraced. He held me and I held him. And he leaned into my ear. And this was vocal communication. The first was nonverbal. He said this to me. He said, "Dad, I have a message for you." And I thought, oh, wow, a message from my son from the other side. And he leaned into my ear. And what he said was, he said, "Dad, I'm proud of you. And I love you." And that was the message. That was, he could have said, "Buy Apple stock." You know what I mean? But the experiences are so personal to me and so private. And yet, that was the experience. And so, that door has not closed. And Tamara has been very key in many things, including the adoption of our boys. We didn't even apply for adoption. They landed in our lives in a very unique and profound way. And Tanya, my current wife, had a dream just prior to the adoptions materializing. And Tamara came to her in a dream. And she came off of an airplane, and she came and met her and embraced her and handed her a package and said, "You'll be needing this." And in the dream, Tanya opened the packages. It was all kinds of baby things, diapers and onesies and all of that. So there's been a grand connection. The interesting thing is Spencer, my little 7-year-old son, who's now full grown, he's the one that wasn't having a lot of these experiences. And I'll tap into this too, because gosh, when he was a young adult, maybe 19, 20, he came to me and he said, "Dad, you speak of these dreams and these visions, and you got to visit Mom and you got to hold Griffin." And he said, "I never got any of that." He said, "I was a little boy." And he said, "I used to beg God, just let me see my mom." And he said, "I got nothing. I got nothing." He said, I begged for 12 years. And he said, either you're making it up or you're deceived in some crazy way. Or if there's some greater power in this eternal life you speak of, he said, if there's a God up there, he doesn't care about me. He says, "I was a little boy. I begged every day just to have something." And he said, "I got nothing. So I'm kind of done with all that." And it broke my heart. I mean, I went home and this was the little boy that would love me no matter what if I was a puddle of blood, right? And I prayed. I fell on my knees. I said, "God, look, I'll give it all away. I'll give it all away. Just give my son something. Give him some light. Give him some experience." And the answer I got, and I don't profess to talk to God every day, but I got a profound answer that night. And God said, "Why are you judging your son? Judge not that you be not judged." He says, "Why are you thinking your experience is grander or better than his? Why would you give away yours thinking that he needs that? His experience is perfect for him. It's perfect for his soul's expansion. Your job, Dad, is to love him unconditionally Stop putting conditions on his experience, on all that happens, and just love him. And that's all in the book too, but it's played out in a beautiful way. Spencer never had a profound near-death experience. He remembers one dream when he was a young teenager that his mother came in a dream and kissed him on his forehead, but he was only angry because it was a dream. It wasn't real. I told him it is real, but he's become the most compassionate man I know. He's a magnificent man. He works with traumatized young people. He's a musician. He puts together little, kid bands, and he's got 12-year-olds just rocking out to Metallica on stage, but that's their therapy. That's their expression. And he said to me at one point, he said, "You know what?" He said, "That door hasn't opened for me that you call God," but he says, "I'll be God's hands. I'll be God's light. I'll be God's love right here, so that I'm tangible, and traumatized kids can run to me. And we'll talk about it, and we'll play music, and we'll heal together in a more tangible way than the ethereal things you talk about." And he's Spence and I are very close, and he is a magnificent man as well. I'm very lucky. My sons are all incredible. That's a long answer, Dawn, but thank you for asking the question. I do have, there's a lot of open connection, and yet what I experience isn't what others experience or what they even should experience. We're all having the perfect experience for what we came here to get.
Hi, it's Corrine. I just wanted to say, and I know everyone has their own experience, but regarding your son, Spencer, I just want to say how blessed he was to have a father like you. And of course, I'm very blessed with my parents, but I was very close to my grandmother. And when she passed away, she used to visit me in my dreams all the time. And I was at her house, and she was making me pancakes because I was there. My mom worked full time, and so did my dad. I was there, like she was a second mom. Right. And so when you share that story, because when I was little, if you want to share it with Spencer, I know she was there, but it was just frightening to me, those dreams, because I kept thinking she was going to turn around because her back was against, my back was towards her back. She was cooking, but I could see her by looking down. And I was scared that it was going to be a skeleton. So I'm scared, I was scared. I was really little, and I'd been seeing people who had passed on since I was little too. But I just want to share that and just say, I appreciate you sharing that beautiful experience that, it is dreams, but they are there with us, and sharing that with us.
Oh, they certainly are. And that's beautiful. In fact, it's interesting. Spencer has just written a children's book.
Beautiful.
About the grief process. And I don't know. I mean, I could read it to you in 5 minutes. If you want me to pull it up, I could share the screen and read it to you. But this is from his perspective as a young child.
I would love that. I personally would love that.
Well, I will find it on my desktop. Let's have one more question while I'm looking for it, and I'll find it, and we'll pull it up and take a look, okay?
Thank you for sharing your insight that everybody has different a different path. I've heard your talks before, always inspired by them. I saw you in Newport Beach at the IONS meeting.
Yes.
That was great. And but yeah, saying, like as you told Spencer that the way you experience God and insight is not the way he should experience. Everybody has their own path. And that really touched me when you said that.
Oh, I think it's such a unique experience. We're all on our own journey. That's, and it's not meant to look alike. I mean, it would be so boring if we were all alike. You know what I mean? It would be so horrible if we all had the same experience and all had the same beliefs or all had the same demeanors or features or any of it. I think that's the beauty is our uniqueness, even in our experience. We make this mistake sometimes that everyone's supposed to be alike. And yet I think the key is to finding unconditional love in our uniqueness rather than, outside of it.
How about your two new sons? Are they pretty much into all this stuff, or are they?
They're each unique and different. Zach. Zach is my brooding, tortured artist. He's living down in southern Utah, and he's a very somber. He's a very old soul. He's a very wise soul, and yet he is. He's one of those Gen Zers. He works at a sports bar and he loves it. He's a great cook. He knows how to tend bar. He does all these things, and he has what he has sufficient for his needs, and he's very happy with it, and he's very content in his life, doing what he's doing. He didn't go to college. He chose not to. He's a brilliant. He's got a very high IQ. But he's like, nope, I have everything I need. I'm quite happy and content. And I thought, wow, we could all learn from that. We've all been so pushed to become something and gain something or earn something. And it's like, no, he's quite happy just being. So that's Zach. And Aiden, my youngest, is a beautiful and courageous soul. He's the comedian. He keeps us all laughing. He's a very lighthearted, energetic, kid, and he's made some interesting choices in his life, and yet he's learned from it. Magnificent soul too. They're all so unique and so different, and their life journeys are so unique and different, as are all of us. But it's played out in a beautiful, beautiful way. It really has.
I was wondering if there's one thing you would like for us to walk away with, what would be the message? What do you mean heal?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say this, that it's a choice. I had a profound experience once when I was told to choose joy, that I could choose joy. And that would be one bit of coaching as well. No matter our circumstances, choose joy, choose to be joyful, choose to be grateful. And if there was anything else, it would simply be, just love each other, love each other a little bit more. I mean, make that phone call, send that text message, whatever it is, the people that mean something to you, let them know. And it might even be a smile to a stranger on the street. Those little things are the big things. And that would be my thing for you to walk away with is, hey, we don't always get tomorrow. Let's make it count today. and let's love each other a little more. And particularly, this was a big lesson for me, is self-love. Self-love. Forgive yourself. Lighten up on yourself a little bit. I had so much guilt around the accident, and until I learned to forgive myself, that's when I could begin to speak about it. That's when I could write a book, is when I finally let go. I still embrace my upbringing. The great master Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And I'm really good. I was really good at loving the neighbors, but I wasn't good at loving myself. And it's like, gosh, I can only give what I have until I have self-love. Perhaps maybe I don't know how to love my neighbor because I don't love myself. And if I'm loving my neighbor as myself, if I don't love myself, I won't very well love my neighbor either. But that's a great question. Thank you. That's beautiful. And I've got the book pulled up when you're ready, but let's have a few more questions, and then we'll end with the children's book that Spencer and I collaborated on. You've had me sniffling. This is a beautiful group, by the way. Thank you for your energy. I don't usually cry this hard, but I feel your love and your compassion, and I've been drawn right into it, even over a Zoom call. So
great. We got to know you, and that was precious.
Well, you have assembled a beautiful group. All right. So Spencer and I worked on this, and Spencer basically wrote it. I helped him with the illustrations. We did these painterly, it feels like oil paintings, and it's a simple children's book. Where are you? Dedicated to the children who have lost loved ones and deserve answers. Where are you? You left so quickly that I wondered where you went. Are you in the stars? Are you in the flowers and the grass? Are you in the trees? Are you in the scarf that still smells like your hair? Sometimes I wonder if you were even real. I had a dream of you, but when I woke up, you were still gone. I looked for you on Sunday, but Monday came. Are you in the garden? Are you in the mountains? Are you in the clouds? I remember the banana bread you made and the music you played. Maybe that's where you are, in the music, in those little spaces between the notes. I do my best to remember, but then sometimes I wish I could forget. I think I can picture your face, but it feels like it's slipping away. It feels so unreal to me, the way life was before you left, and yet it's even more unreal how life is now without you. I've looked for you everywhere, yet you still feel so gone, and nothing I do can bring you back. Sometimes, though, when I am calm and think of you, I can almost feel you, like you're right beside me. Maybe that's where you are, right beside me. Or maybe even closer, perhaps you're alive within me. You're alive within me. Are you alive within me? If so, then you are right here in what I see, in what I touch, in what I hear, and even in what I taste. You're the whisper, not the one I hear in my ears, but the one I hear in my heart. The whisper I feel beyond hearing. That whisper takes me to a place deep within myself, a place where we can meet like a dream. Wow, that's where you are. You are within me. You live in my heart. You are alive in my memory, so you live in everything around me. Yes, now I see you. There you are. You are in the stars, the trees, the flowers, the grass, the scarf, the garden, the sky, the mountains, the music. You are alive within me. And because of that, we are both alive within everything. Now I see you everywhere. Thanks for inspiring me to look. Watch over me, okay? The end. But you can see here that there is no end. And that's a very clever way to end the book. He's a brilliant young man. You have angels, he reminds us in the end. And that's the book. That's the children's book that he's going to be printing and getting ready to go. And that'll be available, dedicated to all the children who have lost loved ones and want answers. And we'll see how that goes for him, but he just wants people to heal too. So he found the beauty within himself, which I think is so beautiful. And, again, I often refer to religious figures, but Jesus said, the kingdom is not out there, it's within you. And I think that's what Spencer has embraced, is that God is within him and he can be that light. Anyway, such a pleasure to be with you all. I send my love and my blessings to all of you. Have a very, very happy holiday. However you celebrate that is the perfect way for you, and I honor all of it. So thank you. Thank you for spending the morning, and thank you for creating such a beautiful, safe place for me to cry and share and be with you.